Hi everyone, welcome to Breaking the Silence. So as you can see, I have Harpreet with me again, our own solicitor and our own family solicitor, should I say. And we are going to talk about a topic which is, it's 100% tabooed and it has a stigma to it in most cultures, not just in our kind of South Asian culture. And the topic is prenups and postnups, and are they shady or are they safe? And I'll put my hands up. Before this I didn't have any knowledge to it, and I just kind of had the type of knowledge that people well, the kind of rumors that people were putting out about it, in the beginning. So this video, please watch it, because I'm sure it's going to be very enlightening to a lot of people. So we are going to talk about postnups and prenups, but just before we go into that, what is your understanding, like generally, before people come to you, Harpreet, how they feel about these two, I guess they're kind of drafted contracts?
Yeah, I think most people are either they've made their mind up and they know they've got to do this, or they're very wary, but it's been mentioned to them, especially with the prenup. It's very much like, other half wants a prenup. Should I do it? Should I not? Also, people feeling quite, it's not really what you do before you get married. You don't think about what's going to happen if you split up, because that's not what you're thinking about when you get married. So that's the general consensus, what I get. And with the postnups, it's slightly different, because they are done within the course of marriage, which we can come on to later on. So with them, people are a bit more sure about them. But certainly with the prenups, I think people just initially want to see, should they do it? What's the point?
Yeah. I find that the initial kind of stigma attached to it is, someone's being unfaithful because they don't trust in someone's loyalty. And before I started to speak to you about this, that is what I felt about the contracts as well. But this video is going to clear that all up for everyone. So yeah, I'm just going to head over to. Okay, so legally, Harpreet, if you could explain what a prenup and then what a postnup is that okay?
Yeah, sure. So a prenup's entered into before you get married to set out what would happen to your assets in the event you split up. A postnup is usually done after the marriage, during the course of it, to set out what should happen with all your assets or certain assets in the event you were to split up. And that's basically what they are. And there's lots of reasons why they might be needed. But generally, it's a legal document setting out what should happen to your assets in the event of a marriage breakdown.
Okay, that's what a prenup is. Okay. And what is a postnup then? Because I never heard of this, and you enlightened me. So
yeah. So with the postnup, as I just briefly touched upon, it's done during the course of the marriage. Quite often, it's done perhaps when one party's come into inheritance or something along those lines, and perhaps that needs to be protected and it wasn't something anticipated at the start. Other times it happens when perhaps parties have got back together after a period of a rocky period in their relationship, and they want to make sure they're protected, and it gives them an extra peace of mind, an extra issue that then doesn't need to be dealt with if it doesn't work out once you've got back together.
Okay, so in regards to what a prenup is and a postnup is, they protect us from any type of separation or any type of divorce proceedings that will take place in regards to our assets, material assets, and our finances.
Yeah, because you can set them out in the document. You can set out what's going to happen to certain assets. Sometimes it works when you've got perhaps children from a previous marriage and you want to make sure that those children are going to be protected. Perhaps an asset that was acquired before the marriage. It also just stops the animosity if you were to break up, because you're then not dealing with the finances, which is, you know, if you're going through a divorce or you've gone through a divorce, you know, the hardest part is agreeing what happens to the house, to the money. And if you can set all of that out when you're not at that point, when you're still amicable with each other, you're more likely to do something that you actually want to do, rather than just acting out of, because obviously it's difficult once the relationship is broken down.
Yeah, once it's already deteriorated, isn't it? Then it just kind of goes into a fight.
Yeah, that's it. So yeah, so it will set down all your assets, what you want, what you both want to happen to them, and what it does protect it if you've got older children or other children from a previous relationship that may not necessarily benefit from, say, your husband or your wife's assets. So yeah, there's lots of different reasons for prenups and postnups.
Yeah. Do you see people are more kind of receptive to it now than before?
Yeah, I think it's more commonly spoken about now. I've certainly got more inquiries about it over the last few years than years ago. It's definitely something that I think people think about more. Perhaps it's talked about more. I don't necessarily think the law regarding it has changed. I think perhaps people are just thinking it's okay, because as we've said, you know, generally your first thought is it's not romantic. You know, I don't want to talk about what's going to happen if we break up. But I think more and more people seem to, you know, they've got that train of thought where actually relationships do break up, marriages do break up. And if that happens, we want to know what's going on with our assets. And I think, you know, a lot of people are getting married a lot later now. They've had time to build up their careers, to earn money, to build up assets that they would want to be protected in the event that of a divorce, which perhaps didn't happen many years ago. So yeah.
Okay, so legally, how is it kind of binding, and how does it fall into place?
Yeah, so legally, and this is the downfall, they're not legally binding in the UK, which means they won't be followed and taken into account 100%. If, however, they are executed in the right way, you follow certain guidance, they will be considered and the court would add more weight to them. And in practice, they will be taken into account of the agreement. So what the court would usually want to see is that they've been entered into around 21 days before the marriage, that both parties have taken legal advice or have benefit or have the option to take the legal advice, but the contents of the agreement are reasonable. So, you know, it's not everything in favour of the wife or everything in favour of the husband, you know, that it is a fair settlement. And just confirming that both parties have signed it of their free will. But the main aspect is making sure that they've both got legal advice, independent legal advice, which means from two different solicitors, advising them on the implications of it and advising them that it is fair, or, you know, that it's not favourable just to one party.
Yeah, so just making sure.
Yeah, it protects both of you, not just the one of you. And usually if it takes into account all of the assets you have at the time, and there's usually a clause in there that it's reviewed regularly, because obviously lots of things can happen during the course of the marriage and lots of things can change what the asset split should be. So there does need to be provision in there for it to be reviewed if any certain life events happen. You know, because if you made one like 20 years ago, it may not be so relevant later down the line. So as long as it's being reviewed, and in those circumstances, it will be given weight, and most often it will be used, because both parties have come to that agreement.
Okay. It's interesting that you mentioned that the legal advice that each party gets, you know, the court wants to make sure that there's no conflict of interest.
Yeah. So you have to have two separate solicitors, because ultimately, as a solicitor, you can only effectively advise one party. because there will, even though they're in a relationship, there will be parts where you're advising them of something that could be against their husband or their wife in the future, and it just wouldn't be possible to advise them both of the implications.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Excellent. So in regards to prenups, what do you think is what is like a pro to it, and what is a con to it?
The pros are that it sets out everything in terms of your assets before you get married. So you've kind of had that stress taken out of it, especially if you do have a substantial financial probably maybe a property portfolio, or if one of you have come into some inheritance, perhaps, in some circumstances there could be a large debt that perhaps the other party doesn't want to take on, and she wants to ensure the other person just keeps that debt, because generally that would form a part of the marriage assets. I think the main downside to doing one is just the fact that it's not legally binding. So it's got to be done correctly, and it's got to be done by a solicitor who deals with them regularly, because you'd want to make sure all the relevant clauses are in there, because it's not something that you would do today and know tomorrow that it's done incorrectly. You wouldn't know until years and years down the line, and sometimes never. But if you needed to know, you wouldn't know until quite a long time away. So you just want to make sure it's done properly. And the main downside is that it's not legally binding. But other than that, it's always good, because there's nothing worse than spending all that money later down the line, if the marriage breaks up, dealing with what should happen to the assets, all those letters back and forth through solicitors, and often going to court to deal with it, whereas it could just be dealt with straight away in a simple document.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. Yeah, so I suppose that covers, like, in a nutshell, what a prenup is. And if we just kind of talk a little bit about a postnup, so in regards to the pros and cons of that, what would you say the pros and cons to that would be, and what type of a weight does does it hold any weight legally?
Yeah, so again, I think the pros of it are very similar to a prenup, in that it sets out the assets, it sets out what should happen to the assets. And as I say, quite often a postnup is done after there's been a rocky patch in the marriage, or after one of the parties has maybe come into some money, or into a debt that needs to be dealt with. So there's lots more benefits of doing a postnup, to give that trust element back. Sometimes one of the parties has had maybe a bit of a money issue, or maybe a gambling issue, and they want to make sure that the other person isn't landed with those debts later on at the time, or that the assets aren't then formed part of the other person's assets. So there's definitely pros to it for a postnup. Again, the cons would be similar to a prenup, in that it's essentially not legally binding. Other than that, it's definitely advisable. And again, the court would place weight on it as long as it's done effectively, as long as it's got all those bits that we discussed earlier, sets down all the assets, parties have taken independent advice, and it's always taken into account. So yeah, it's definitely something that should be considered. And I think people do put it off because you don't want to think about it, but it is something that should really be thought about.
Yeah, especially when you go through a rocky kind of time in your marriage. And I suppose deep down people know that, when something's, closer to being over, they know that. So doing something of that nature, even if the marriage does not, kind of end, you've put yourself in a better situation.
Yeah, that's it. And I think it gives that element of trust back, especially with a postnup, because that there possibly has been trust issues, and it gives that element of security and of trust. And you know, if we go back in that rocky patch, at least this aspect of it is dealt with, because we've done it now whilst we've been amicable, rather than later on in the line.
Yeah. Okay. So in a nutshell, I suppose prenups and postnups, they are contracts that are not legally binding, but if done properly, they do hold some sort of weight, you know, when you go through a separation or a divorce process. But also they are, you know, they're there in regards to grounding you in regards to your assets and your material assets, and also your financial income, you know. So yeah, that's really interesting when you think of it like that, like, you know, the way you just explained it and everything. There's this element of you know, I suppose it kind of takes away everything that everybody has been saying and talking about, but then at the same time it's kind of like, okay, so this is actually going to help me in a sticky situation tomorrow, coming from someone who's been in one. You know, I'm like looking at it and thinking, yeah, you know, I can see it is something that I would advise someone about, you know. But going on to that point, you know, how, like, people still feel very reluctant, even maybe after watching this video. But you know, what do you think is the main reason? Because obviously you come from this profession and you've seen it kind of change in the demographics. You're saying more people are inquiring about it. What would you say to people who are not inquiring about it and maybe feel like, oh no, this video is like, you know, it's sin, I shouldn't be doing this? What advice would you give to them? Like, what would be the, maybe like the one or two main things that you would say to them?
I think, don't dismiss it. Don't dismiss it without thinking about it. Think about why you need it. You know, it's not just for the rich, because again, that's something that puts people off. It's not just for the rich. If you've got assets, if you've got savings, if you've got debts, it should be considered. It will protect you in the future. It will save you a whole load of issues and aggravation in the future if you've got this one element sorted. It may be that you never need it. You know, hopefully if the marriage continues and you don't separate, you won't ever need it. But it's peace of mind. So don't dismiss it. Think about it. Seek legal advice. You know, a bit of advice, whether it's needed for you. And it really could save you thousands later on, just by putting that effort and time in at this stage.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, sorry, I think it was my internet connection, but you cut out a little bit there. But yeah, no, you know, like you just said, that it's good to put it in place because it will save absolute thousands later on, you know. And you know, the other point that you made, which is so valid, is you might not even need it.
And I think that's something that puts people off as well, though, because why spend money on something that you don't anticipate needing? Because obviously you don't go into a marriage to break up, as we've said. So loads of people think, you know, I'm not going to spend my money on this because we're not going to break up. But it's one of those, you know, you don't know what's around the corner. You don't know what might happen. Give yourself the peace of mind and think about it. You know, it may not be for you. It may not be necessary for you and your partner, but it's definitely worth thinking about and not just dismissing it straight away, thinking, oh, I don't really have any assets. It's to be thought about.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Because people do probably will dismiss it, and I kind of see when they're about to get married and everything, and you're in this bubble and everything's so nice, and you know, but yeah, you know, that I suppose like for myself, I've been in that bubble as well, you know, and then later on when things go bad down the line, and like Harpreet said, it won't happen. It's not meant to happen to everyone, and I don't wish it to happen to anyone. But you know, don't let it put you off, because when you're in that situation, you're going to spend like so much money. You know, when you're going through a separation divorce process, if two people are not kind of mutually agreeing to things, then it's going to cost a lot of money without a say.
That's it. And whether you go through the court procedure at that stage, or you do it via solicitors, or even you do it yourself, it's going to cost a lot of money. It's emotionally really difficult. And you probably know that better than I do, but obviously from, you know, my experience in doing it, it's draining. It's really, really hard.
Very taxing,
Hopefully it's made people think a little bit about whether it is for them. But yeah, even if you are married, and, you know, like we said, there's always the option to do a postnup if there's a reason that's come up for that to happen during the course of your marriage. So it doesn't always have to be thought about before you get married.
And you know, it's priceless knowledge at the end of the day, which, you know, I suppose that was the main reason why we did this video, because up until we did this, like I said, I didn't know about postnup, and before that I had a different perspective on a prenup. So you know, I'm really as Harpreet is, you know, hoping that this is kind of change people's views and kind of give them a more open perspective to all of this.
And I think that's our main thing, isn't it, is to just give people the options, and the you know, because a lot of the stigma also is around, we don't need to talk about that, we don't need to talk about marriages breaking up, you know, just get married, marriages don't break up, because that is something that I think we've always kind of been told, you know, marriages don't break up, you just make it work. So why would you need a postnup? But obviously more and more people know nowadays that actually they do break up, you know. Unfortunately, you can't just get on with it, and so in those circumstances it is going to be valuable. But yeah, just stop and think, do I need one? Will I need one in the future? So there's no harm in thinking about it, see if it suits your situation.
And actually I was just going to say before we end the video, is it something that you know, people ask you about it? So I suppose Harpreet's links are going to be down below in this video as well, and you know, in regards to her Instagram and any other kind of information that she wants to provide. So if it is something that you need, then, you know, you'll be able to gain that information from the drop down box, and then you know, contact Harpreet for it. But Harpreet, thank you so much for, you know, giving us this information, and just you know, it's knowledge is key.
That's it. No, thanks for giving me the opportunity to highlight a little bit about it. But yeah, if anyone wants any more advice about it, contact me. You know, I'll always offer the initial free advice to see if it suits you, and then the rest is up to you. But yeah, as I say, as you've said, my contact details are there, so feel free to contact me.
Of course, Yep, so guys, don't miss out on that opportunity if it is something that you are looking for. But thank you so much for watching Breaking the Silence. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.